So Rav Moshe Feinstein talks about this concept of suicide, mercy killing sporadically, not necessarily specifically throughout the Igros Moshe. Here are some of the responses that I saw that were translated. He himself did not want his Igros Moshe translated. I saw that, ironically, translated in a book that was made public by his grandson, who said that he had permission to do it specifically in these areas. But one of the questions, one of the responses in 273 was that he said he opposed the opinion cited in the Minchas Chinuch that if someone attempts suicide, there's no mitzvah to save his life. The author of the Minchas Chinuch carries the analogy to a lost object to its rational conclusion. If someone throws away an object, there's no mitzvah to return it. Likewise, if someone throws away his life, there's no mitzvah to return it to him. So Rav Moshe continues, I believe this is a misapplication of the principle. A person is permitted to relinquish ownership of a physical possession. That's called hefker. But to destroy life is a capital crime. And he goes on, they have a special mitzvah that sells nefashos, regardless of whether the individual himself thought his life was worthless. So interesting. So he disagrees with the Minchas Chinuch when it comes to suicide, whether or not you have an obligation to try to save that person. Number two over here, he is talking, this tshuva, he was talking about whether or not you could maintain somebody alive in order to take their organs. And so he says here, if prolonging the life of a patient means that he will be maintained in a state of suffering, then it's forbidden to do so. We know from Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, that the Rama permitted removal of a crystal of salt put under the tongue of a dying patient, which is at the time believed to be a means of prolonging his life. Removal of this deterrent to dying was permitted because of the anguish the patient was suffering. Surely it is forbidden to do anything that will prolong a life of anguish. Moreover, if the patient is not suffering, it's possible to prolong his life, then it's certainly not permitted to cease therapy. The only justification for refraining from further treatment is that the quality of life of this pain-ridden patient is such as to justify refraining from further treatment. So we hear this concept of Sheva al Tasa again, maybe, like Meser Hamonea. So he goes on, if a patient is terminally ill and in intractable pain, there's no hope of survival, but it's possible to prolong his life, then he says it's improper to do so. He should be made as comfortable as possible. The implication here is talking about the donor who's being kept alive artificially just to keep his organs. It's hard to prove that that patient's actually in pain, but he's saying, if he is in pain, then you certainly should not do it. And then he goes on, he says, if it's possible to provide drugs that will make the patient comfortable so that he will not be in pain, then effort should be made to prevent the patient from dying. But not if he's halachically considered a goses. The term goses is heavy, labored, erratic breathing that occurs when death is imminent. So he does define a goses in such a way. And he says they shouldn't be treated at all. And he quotes the Rambam, who says a goses is like a sputtering wick. The patient is critically ill, unable to breathe, is suffering from oxygen. Providing oxygen is required, but not to prolong life, but to ease the pain of air hunger. So essentially, my reading it is saying that you shouldn't keep the donor necessarily alive if he's a goses, but also if he's in pain, prolonging the suffering is a problem. He goes on in another area I found here. Clearly, there's also opinion of the Ramah, where he not only permits, but even requires the cessation of the treatment that is prolonging the dying process, even though the individual will die more quickly. The life of anguish which the goses is experiencing justifies the cessation of therapy. If the patient is not in pain, there's no rational reason why any effort should be made to shorten his life. Well, actually, we did that part. So the overall, Rav Moshe does bring in these thoughts in different areas of his responsa, again showing that this concept of Mesir Hamonea, you can do it, certainly by somebody who's goses and in pain. And I would like to now further go on to some other interesting responsa. First, Rav Steinberg, when he talks about mercy killing, he says clearly, even if a terminally ill patient is suffering terribly, and even if he asks in a clear and unambiguous manner that he be killed, one may not acquiesce. He who kills him is guilty of murder, since there is no difference in Jewish law whether one kills a healthy person or a terminally ill patient, including ghosts. Any action that causes shortening of life for even one moment is forbidden, is considered spilling blood, because even in the face of severe suffering, it's forbidden to destroy life actively. Active killing is not justified no matter what, and we'll do the rest in the next section. So this section we just specifically looked at some of the writings of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and we'll do the rest coming up.